She found out her father was dead from a Google alert, not a phone call from her stepmother, not a message from her half-siblings, not even a cold, formal letter from the family lawyer. A Google alert, because she had set one up years ago, knowing that when the day finally came, nobody would bother to tell her. Richard Calloway, billionaire, industrialist. Maya stared at the headline on her phone, standing in the middle of a grocery store in Portland, a basket of vegetables in her hand. People walked past her, going about their ordinary lives, while her world collapsed in silence. Her father was dead, and she hadn't even known he was sick. The funeral was held 3 days later. Maya wasn't invited. She learned about it the same way she learned about everything else in that family, from the internet. But what the Calloways didn't know, what they couldn't possibly have anticipated, was that Richard Calloway had spent the last 10 years preparing for this moment. He knew exactly what his family would do. He knew they would erase his firstborn daughter from his death the same way they had tried to erase her from his life. And he had made sure they would regret it. This is a story about a father's love, a family's cruelty, and the most devastating will reading in legal history. But before we dive in, I want you guys to know that we do not interrupt the your viewing experience by showing ads during the video. So a subscribe from you will really help us. Please subscribe so that we can continue uploading such stories. Thanks. Let's get into this story. To understand what happened at that will reading, you need to understand the Calloway family. And to understand the Calloway family, you need to start with a love story that ended in tragedy. Richard Calloway was 25 years old when he met Elena Reyes. He was the son of a moderately successful businessman, working his way up in his father's small manufacturing company. She was a first-generation college student, studying to become a nurse. They met at a coffee shop. Richard spilled his drink on her textbook. He offered to buy her a new one. She told him he couldn't afford the book and should just buy her dinner instead. He fell in love with her on the spot. They married 6 months later. It was a small wedding, nothing fancy. Richard's parents didn't approve. Elena was too poor, too ethnic, too different from the women they had imagined for their son. But Richard didn't care. Elena was the love of his life. A year later, Maya was born. Richard used to say that holding his daughter for the first time was the moment he understood why he was alive. Everything before that moment had just been preparation. Everything after was purpose. For 5 years, they were happy. Richard worked long hours building the business. Elena raised Maya and worked part-time at a local hospital. They lived in a small house that they filled with laughter and music and love. Then Elena got sick. It started with fatigue, then headaches, then a seizure that sent her to the emergency room. Brain cancer, stage 4. Inoperable. Elena died 6 months later. She was 31 years old. Maya was 5. Richard Calloway buried his wife on a gray November morning. He held his daughter's hand as they lowered the casket into the ground. Maya didn't understand what was happening. She kept asking when Mommy was coming back. Richard couldn't answer. Something broke inside him that day. The light that Elena had brought into his life went out. He threw himself into work, building the company with a ferocious intensity that surprised everyone who knew him. Within a decade, Calloway Industries had gone from a small manufacturing firm to a major player in industrial equipment. Within 2 decades, it was a billion-dollar empire. Richard became wealthy beyond imagination, but he was also lonely. Maya was raised largely by nannies and housekeepers. Richard loved his daughter, but he didn't know how to be a parent without Elena. He worked late. He traveled constantly. He told himself he was building a future for Maya, but in truth, he was running from a past he couldn't bear to face. When Maya was 12, Richard met Victoria. Victoria Ashworth was everything Elena was not. Cold where Elena was warm, calculating where Elena was spontaneous, ambitious where Elena was content. She was also beautiful, sophisticated, and very good at making Richard feel less alone. They married within a year. Victoria came with baggage. 2 children from a previous marriage, a son named Preston, 15, and a daughter named Isabel, 13. Both had been raised with the understanding that they deserved the best of everything, and other people existed primarily to provide it. Maya hated them instantly, and they hated her right back. But the real problem was Victoria. From the moment she entered the Calloway household, Victoria set about remaking it in her image. She redecorated the house, removing every trace of Elena. She hired new staff, firing the longtime housekeeper who had helped raise Maya. She enrolled Preston and Isabel in the most exclusive private schools, and quietly suggested that Maya might be better suited to a boarding school far away. Richard, lost in his grief and his work, didn't see what was happening. He thought Victoria was helping. He thought she was bringing order to his chaotic household. He didn't notice that his daughter was being systematically pushed to the margins. Maya noticed it. The first incident happened 2 months after the wedding. Maya came home from school to find her bedroom had been redecorated. The walls, which had been painted a soft lavender that Elena had chosen when Maya was a baby, were now a harsh modern gray. The furniture had been replaced. The curtains were different, and the photographs of her mother that had lined the windowsill were gone. Maya ran through the house, searching for them. She found them in a trash bag in the garage, mixed with coffee grounds and vegetable peels. She pulled them out, hands shaking, and ran to find her father. Richard was in his office, on a conference call. Maya burst in, clutching the stained photographs. "Daddy!" she cried. "My pictures." Someone threw them away. Richard muted the call, his face torn between concern and irritation. "Maya, I'm in a meeting." "What's wrong?" "My pictures of Mommy." They were in the garbage. Victoria appeared in the doorway behind her. "I'm so sorry," Victoria said smoothly. "The decorators must have made a mistake. We were updating Maya's room and some things got misplaced." She smiled at Richard. "I'll sort it out, darling." "You finish your call." She took Maya by the shoulders and guided her out of the office. As soon as they were in the hallway, Victoria's grip tightened. "Don't ever interrupt your father's work again," she hissed, her voice barely above a whisper. "He's a busy man." "He doesn't have time for your hysteria." "Those were my pictures of my mother," Maya whispered back. "Your mother is dead," Victoria said flatly. "And the sooner you accept that, the easier things will be for everyone." She released Maya's shoulders and walked away, her heels clicking on the hardwood floor. Maya stood in the hallway, clutching the stained photographs, and learned her first lesson about her new family. She was alone. The incidents continued. Preston discovered that Maya kept a diary. He stole it, read it aloud at dinner, and mocked her entries about missing her mother. Victoria laughed. Richard told Maya she should be more careful with her private things. Isabel spread rumors about Maya. At school, that she was weird, that she talked to herself, that her mother had committed suicide because she couldn't stand being Maya's mother anymore. Maya came home, crying. Victoria suggested that perhaps Maya was being too sensitive. Richard said he would talk to Isabel, but Maya never saw any evidence that he did. The household staff, many of whom had known Maya since she was a baby, began to disappear. The housekeeper who used to braid Maya's hair was fired for stealing, Victoria claimed, though nothing was ever proven. The cook, who made Maya's favorite meals, was replaced with a chef who only prepared food Victoria approved of. The gardener who had maintained Elena's rose garden was let go, and the roses were dug up to make room for a swimming pool. One by one, every trace of Maya's old life was erased, and Richard, lost in his work and his grief, saw none of it, or chose to see none of it. Maya was never sure which was worse. At 14, she confronted her father. She told him that Victoria was cruel to her when he wasn't around, that Preston had broken her favorite photograph of her mother and laughed about it, that Isabel had told her she was just a poor man's daughter who didn't belong in this family. Richard listened. He said he would talk to Victoria, and then nothing changed, because Victoria had gotten to him first. She had spent months planting seeds of doubt. Maya was difficult. Maya was acting out. Maya was jealous of her new siblings. Maya needed therapy. Maya needed discipline. Maya needed to learn that the world didn't revolve around her. Richard didn't believe all of it, but he believed enough. And he was so tired, so overwhelmed, so desperate for someone else to handle the domestic problems while he focused on the business. So Maya learned to survive. She kept her head down. She got good grades. She joined clubs and activities that kept her out of the house. She counted the days until she could leave for college and never come back. At 80, she got a full scholarship to a university across the country. She packed her bags and left without a goodbye party. Victoria didn't offer one, and Richard was traveling for business. Maya didn't come home for Thanksgiving that year, or Christmas, or the following summer. She told herself she was busy with school. The truth was, she couldn't bear to see what her family had become. Over the next decade, the distance only grew. Maya graduated with honors. She went to graduate school. She became a marine biologist, working on ocean conservation projects that took her to remote corners of the world. She lived on research grants and modest salaries, and she was happy. Meanwhile, the Calloway family thrived, at least on the surface. Preston joined Calloway Industries after failing out of 3 different colleges. Victoria convinced Richard that her son needed a chance to prove himself. Within 5 years, Preston was a vice president. Despite having accomplished nothing of note except antagonizing employees and padding his expense account, Isabero married a minor European aristocrat, divorced him 2 years later, and received a generous settlement that allowed her to pursue a lifestyle of professional social. Victoria herself became the undisputed queen of the Calloway Empire. She sat on charity boards and attended galas, and redecorated the estate every few years, just to remind everyone of her exquisite taste. She controlled the household staff, the social calendar, and, increasingly, Richard himself. And Maya became the daughter who was never mentioned. When anyone asked about Richard's children, Victoria would smile and talk about Preston's important work at the company and Isabel's glamorous life abroad. Maya's name never came up. Photos of her had been quietly removed from the estate. It was as if she had never existed. Maya knew all this because she kept tabs on her family from afar. Not because she wanted to, because she couldn't quite let go. She still loved her father. Despite everything, she remembered the man who had held her hand at her mother's funeral. The man who used to read her bedtime stories before the darkness took over. The man who, she believed, still loved her somewhere beneath all the walls he had built. Every year on her birthday, Richard called. The conversations were awkward, stilted, full of silences. But decayed every single year. Until this year, her 35th birthday came and went. No call from Richard. Maya told herself he was busy. She told herself it didn't matter. But 2 weeks later, when the Google alert appeared on her phone, she understood. He hadn't called because he was dying, and no one had told her. Maya flew to Boston the day after she found out about the funeral. She didn't go to the estate. She couldn't have gotten past the gates, even if she tried. Instead, she checked into a modest hotel near the airport and spent 2 days staring at the ceiling, trying to process what she was feeling. Grief, certainly. Anger, absolutely. But also something she couldn't quite name. A sense that something was incomplete, that her father had left the world with too much unsaid between them. On the 3rd day, she received a phone call. "Ms. Reyes," the voice said, using her mother's name. The name Maya had legally taken at 80. "My name is Harold Finch. I'm an attorney with Finch & Associates. I represent the estate of Richard Calloway." Maya's hand tightened on the phone. "I'd like to meet with you," the lawyer continued. "There are matters regarding your father's estate that require your immediate attention." "I wasn't invited to the funeral," Maya said flatly. "I assumed I wasn't part of the estate." There was a pause on the line. "That's precisely why we need to meet," Harold Finch said. "Can you be at my office tomorrow at 2? Maya wrote down the address. She had no idea what to expect. The law office of Finch & Associates was not what Maya had anticipated. When she arrived, she expected a small practice, maybe a single lawyer handling the overflow work that Victoria's expensive attorneys didn't want to touch. Instead, she found herself in the lobby of a major law firm. Marble floors, original artwork on the walls, receptionists in designer suits. This wasn't a second-tier operation. This was one of the most prestigious firms in the city. "Ms. Reyes," a young associate appeared beside her. "Mr. Finch is ready for you. Please, follow me." She was led through a maze of corridors to a corner office with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the harbor. Harold Finch rose from behind his desk to greet her. He was older than she had expected. Perhaps 70, with white hair and kind eyes, and the steady demeanor of someone who had spent decades dealing with complicated family situations. "Thank you for coming," he said, gesturing to a chair. "Please sit. Can I get you anything?" "Coffee. Water? Just answers," Maya said. "Taking?" "I said," Harold nodded slowly. "Direct." I appreciate that. Your father was the same way. The mention of a father made Maya's throat tighten. You knew him. For 30 years, Harold replied. He was my client, but he was also my friend, and I need you to know, before we go any further, that what I'm about to tell you was his explicit wish. I am following his instructions to the letter. Maya frowned. Instructions about what? Harold reached into his desk and pulled out a thick folder. Your father knew he was dying for almost a year, Harold said. Pancreatic cancer. By the time they caught it, there was nothing to be done. He had months, not years. A year, Maya repeated. He knew for a year. Yes, and no one told me. He wanted to tell you himself. He tried, multiple times, but Victoria monitored his communications. She had access to his phone, his email, his schedule. Every time he tried to reach out, she intercepted it. Maya felt the blood drained from her face. She stopped him from contacting me. She stopped everyone from contacting you. The funeral invitation, Sukasit was went to an old address you haven't lived at in 15 years. Victoria made sure of that. Harold leaned forward. Your father was not a perfect man, Miss Reyes. He made mistakes, especially with you. He knew that, and he regretted it deeply. But he never stopped loving you. And when he realized he was dying, he took steps to ensure that his final wishes could not be interfered with. What kind of steps? Harold slid the folder across the desk. This is your father's true last will and testament. It was drafted in secret, witnessed by my colleagues, and kept in a secure location that Victoria knew nothing about. The will she and her children believe is in effect as a previous version, one that was superseded by this document 6 months ago. Maya opened the folder. Her hands were shaking. She started to read, and as the words sank in, her eyes grew wider. This can't be right, she whispered. It is, Harold assured her. Every word. Your father wanted you to have it all, Ms. Reyes. Everything. Maya looked up from the document. But what about Victoria, Preston? Isabel? What about the will they think is valid? Harold smiled. It was not a kind smile. It was the smile of a man who had been waiting for this moment for a very long time. That, he said, is where things get interesting. The formal will reading was scheduled for 3 days after Maya's meeting with Harold Finch. It was held in the great room of the Calloway estate, the same room where Victoria had hosted countless charity, galas, and dinner parties. Crystal chandeliers, antique furniture, portraits of Calloway ancestors lining the walls. Victoria had insisted on making it an event. She had invited not just the family, but also key members of the Calloway Industries Board, several prominent society friends, and a reporter from a business magazine who was writing a profile on the late Richard Calloway. She wanted witnesses to her triumph. Preston and Isabel were already seated when Maya walked in. The reaction was immediate. What is she doing here? Preston demanded, shooting to his feet. He was 38 years old, but still had the petulant energy of a teenager denied a toy. She wasn't invited. This is a family matter. I'm family, Maya said calmly. Or did you forget? You gave up that ride when you abandoned Daddy. Isabel sniffed. She was draped in designer black, her grief performance impeccable. Where were you when he was sick? Where were you when he needed you? I wasn't told he was sick, Maya replied, but I think you know that. Victoria rose from her chair at the head of the room. She was 62 years old, and still stunning, in the cold, polished way of women who had spent fortunes on maintaining their appearance. Maya, she said, her voice dripping with false warmth. What a surprise. I'm so sorry you couldn't make it to the funeral. We tried to reach you, of course, but you've made yourself so difficult to find over the years. You sent the invitation to an address I left 15 years ago, Maya said. The same address you've been sending my birthday cards to. The ones that always come back returned to sender. Something flickered in Victoria's eyes. Surprise, perhaps, or recognition that Maya wasn't the pushover she had expected. Well, Victoria recovered smoothly. You're here now. That's what matters. Please, sit. The lawyer should be arriving shortly. Maya took a seat at the back of the room. She folded her hands in her lap and waited. The board members whispered among themselves. The society friends exchanged glances. The reporter scribbled notes. Everyone was waiting to see how the Calloway fortune would be divided. No one was prepared for what was coming. Harold Finch arrived precisely at 2 o'clock. He was accompanied by 2 associates and a court reporter. This was unusual, Victoria noted with a frown. Will readings were typically informal affairs, not legal proceedings. "Mr. Finch," Victoria said, rising to greet him. "How nice to see you. I wasn't aware you would be handling this personally. I assumed the family attorneys would be conducting the reading." "They will not," Harold said simply. "Mr. Calloway specifically requested that I handle all matters relating to his final wishes." He moved to the front of the room and set a leather briefcase on the table. "Before we begin," he said, "I want to make clear that what I am about to read is the final, legally binding last will and testament of Richard David Calloway. It was drafted, signed, and witnessed in accordance with all applicable laws. Any challenges to its validity will be vigorously defended." Victoria's smile faltered slightly. "Of course," she said. "We have no intention of challenging anything. Richard and I discussed his wishes thoroughly." "Did you?" Harold asked mildly. "Interesting." He opened the briefcase and removed a thick document. "The last will and testament of Richard David Calloway." Harold began reading. "I, Richard David Calloway, being of sound mind and body, do hereby declare this to be my final will, revoking all previous wills and codicils." Victoria nodded, satisfied. This was standard language. The will she had seen, the one Richard had signed 5 years ago, began exactly the same way. "To my wife, Victoria Ashworth Calloway," Harold continued, "I leave the sum of $1. The room went silent. Victoria's face froze. "I'm sorry," she said, her voice tight. "Could you repeat that?" $1, Harold confirmed. He continued reading. "This amount is not an oversight. It is a deliberate choice. Victoria knows why." Victoria's composure cracked. Her face flushed an ugly red. "This is absurd," she sputtered. "Richard would never. We had an agreement. I was to receive the estate, the investments, everything." Harold ignored her and continued. "To my stepson Preston Ashworth. I leave the sum of $1 to my stepdaughter, Isabel Ashworth Montgomery. I leave the sum of $1. Preston leaped to his feet. "This is fraud!" he shouted. "My father," he stopped, catching himself. "Richard promised me the company. I've been running the manufacturing division for years." "You've been mismanaging the manufacturing division for years," Harold corrected calmly. "Your father was quite aware of the quarterly losses your division has been posting. He has documentation of the expense reports you falsified, the employees you drove away, and the clients you lost through sheer incompetence." Preston's face went white. Harold turned to Isabel. "Mrs. Ashworth Montgomery, your father also documented the loans you received over the past decade, $742,000, all of which you claimed were investments in your various business ventures, none of which were ever repaid or generated any return." Isabel's mouth opened and closed. No sound came out. "Those funds," Harold continued, "will be deducted from any inheritance you might have otherwise received. Since you are now receiving $1, we will not be pursuing repayment at this time." The society friends were whispering frantically. The board members looked horrified. The reporter was writing so fast his pen was nearly smoking. Victoria stood up, her whole body trembling with rage. "I will contest this," she hissed. Richard was not in his right mind. He was manipulated. He was coerced. "I will tie this up in courts for decades." Harold reached into his briefcase and pulled out a USB drive. "Your husband anticipated that response," he said. "This drive contains video depositions recorded by Mr. Calloway over the past 6 months. In them, he details his mental state, his reasoning for each decision, and specific instances of behavior by you and your children that inform those decisions." He set the drive on the table. "I strongly recommend you watch these recordings before deciding whether to pursue legal action. The contents are quite detailed and quite damaging." Victoria stared at the drive like it was a coiled snake. Harold turned back to the document. "Now," he said, "shall I continue to the primary beneficiary?" The room held its breath. Maya sat perfectly still in her chair, her heart pounding so hard she could feel it in her throat. Harold began to read. "To my daughter, Maya Elena Reyes. I leave the entirety of my remaining estate. Victoria made a strangled sound. Her hand flew to her chest as if she had been physically struck. That's not possible, she gasped. Richard would never. We discussed this. We agreed. Harold continued, as if she hadn't spoken. This includes the Calloway estate and all its contents, valued at approximately $62 million. All investment accounts and financial holdings, valued at approximately $340 million. My 51% ownership stake in Calloway Industries, valued at approximately $480 million based on current market conditions. Preston slammed his fist on the arm of his chair. This is insane, he shouted. I've been running that company for years. I've given my life to it. You can't just hand it to someone who's never set foot in the building. Harold looked at him coolly. You've been employed by the company, he corrected. Running it is a rather generous characterization. The board has submitted multiple complaints about your leadership over the past 3 years. Your father chose not to act on them during his lifetime, but he was quite aware of the situation. He returned to the document. I also leave to Maya my art collection, valued at approximately $47 million, including works by Monet, Picasso, and several contemporary artists whose careers I supported. My vintage automobile collection, valued at approximately $8 million. My yacht, the Alina, valued at approximately $12 million. My properties in Aspen, Martha's Vineyard, and the south of France, valued collectively at approximately $35 million. We tachitum, Victoria's face grew paler. And finally, Harold continued, my personal effects, including all items belonging to my first wife, Elena Reyes, which I have preserved in a climate-controlled storage facility in Providence. For the past 20 years, these items are priceless to me, and I trust Maya will treasure them as I have. Harold looked up. The total value of the estate, after debts and taxes, is approximately $940 million. The room erupted. Victoria was screaming, her carefully cultivated composure completely shattered. This was her nightmare scenario. 20 years of manipulation, 20 years of careful positioning, 20 years of making sure she and her children would inherit everything. All of it destroyed by a single document. You manipulated him, Victoria shrieked at Harold. He took advantage of a dying man. He didn't know what he was signing. Harold remained utterly calm. Mrs. Calloway, your husband was evaluated by 3 independent physicians during the drafting of this will. All 3 certified that he was of sound mind and fully capable of understanding the implications of his decisions. Their statements are attached as exhibits. He pulled out another document. Additionally, your husband provided video testimony explaining his reasoning. Would you like me to play it now, in front of everyone assembled? Victoria's mouth snapped shut. I thought not, Harold said. Preston tried a different tactic. He stood up, straightening his jacket, attempting to project authority. Look, he said, his voice forcibly calm. I understand that Richard may have had some issues with how things were handled, but we can work this out like adults. Maya, you and I can sit down, discuss a reasonable arrangement. You don't want to run a company. You're a marine biologist. Let me continue managing the business side, and you can have a generous allowance. Everyone wins. Maya looked at him. Did you just offer me an allowance? She said flatly. From my own inheritance. I'm trying to be practical, Preston insisted. The company needs stability. The board needs confidence. If you come in and try to take over, it'll be chaos. The board, Harold interjected, has already been briefed on the situation. They're quite looking forward to working with Ms. Reyes. Several of them have expressed relief, actually. Preston's facade cracked. Relief? About what? About the change in leadership, Harold said simply. Your father wasn't the only one who noticed the quarterly losses. Isabel, who had been sitting in stunned silence, suddenly burst into tears. This isn't fair, she wailed. Daddy promised us. He said we would be taken care of. He said we were his real family. Your father, Harold said, his voice softening slightly, made provisions for you in earlier versions of his will. Those provisions were contingent on certain behaviors. When those behaviors did not materialize, he revised his plans. What behaviors? Isabel demanded. Harold consulted his notes. Treating his biological daughter with basic human decency, For one, your father documented multiple instances where you participated in or initiated cruel treatment toward Maya. The incident with the rumors about her mother's death was particularly noted. Isabel's face went white. I was a child, she whispered. You were 13, Harold replied. Old enough to know better, and the behavior continued well into your adulthood. Your father kept records. The society friends were openly staring now. The reporter had given up on taking notes and was simply recording everything on his phone. The board members were exchanging looks that suggested they had known something like this was coming, and Maya sat perfectly still, tears streaming down her face. Not tears of joy, not tears of triumph. Tears of grief, because her father was gone. And this fortune, this empire, this inheritance, none of it could bring him back. None of it could give her the conversations they never had, the apologies that were never spoken, the years that were stolen by distance and misunderstanding and Victoria's careful manipulation. All she had now was money. It felt like the loneliest thing in the world. There is one additional provision, Harold said, his voice cutting through the chaos. The room slowly quieted. Mr. Calloway requested that I read aloud a personal letter to his daughter. He asked that it be done in front of all assembled, so that there would be no question about his intentions. Harold pulled out a handwritten letter. Maya's breath caught. She recognized her father's handwriting. Harold began to read. My dearest Maya, if you are hearing this, Tenyam Gone, and I have failed to say in life what I should have said 1,000 times. I am sorry. Maya's tears fell faster. I am sorry for the years I worked instead of being present. I'm sorry for marrying Victoria without seeing who she truly was. I am sorry for believing her lies about you, even when my heart knew they were lies. I am sorry for every birthday I missed, every graduation I wasn't at, every moment of your life I chose to ignore because facing you meant facing my own failures. Harold's voice cracked slightly. He cleared his throat and continued. You are so much like your mother. Not just in appearance, but in spirit. Elena was the best person I ever knew, and you inherited her kindness, her strength, her ability to love even those who don't deserve it. I didn't deserve your love, but you gave it anyway. Every year when I called on your birthday, I could hear it in your voice. You still loved me, despite everything. That love kept me alive longer than any medicine could. Victoria was staring at the floor, her face ashy. I am leaving you everything not because you need it, but because you are the only one who will use it well. You care about the world. You care about making things better. You care about people. Victoria and her children care only about themselves. I learned that too late. Take what I have built and do something good with it. Something your mother would have been proud of. Something I can be proud of wherever I am. I love you, Maya. I always did. I'm just sorry I didn't say it when it mattered. Your father, Richard. Your father, Richard. Harold set the letter down. The room was completely silent. Maya stood up slowly. Her legs felt unsteady beneath her. She walked to the front of the room, past Victoria's frozen figure, past Preston's stunned expression, past Isabel's tear-streaked makeup. She picked up the letter and held it against her chest. Then she turned to face the family that had tried to erase her. I want you out of this house, Maya said quietly. You have 72 hours. Victoria's head snapped up. You can't do that. This is my home. I've lived here for over 20 years. It's my home now, Maya replied. And I want you out of it. She looked at Preston. I'll be conducting a full audit of Calloway Industries starting Monday. Based on what the lawyers have told me, you should probably start looking for other employment. Preston's face contorted with rage. You can't do this, he snarled. You're nobody. You're just the help's daughter who got lucky. I'm the majority shareholder, Maya corrected. That means I can do whatever I want. She turned to Isabel. I have no interest in pursuing your debts. Consider them forgiven, but don't contact me again. Finally, she faced Victoria, the woman who had spent 20 years trying to destroy her, the woman who had stolen her father, piece by piece, year by year. The woman who had made sure Maya learned about her own father's death from a Google alert. Maya leaned in close. He saw you, she whispered. In the end, he saw exactly who you were, and he made sure everyone else would see it too. Victoria's face crumpled. Get out, Maya said. "All of you, get out." The Calloway estate emptied within 48 hours. Victoria hired movers and cleared out her personal belongings, along with several items that didn't technically belong to her anymore. Maya didn't fight it. Let her have the furniture and the artwork and the jewelry. They were just things. Preston was terminated from Calloway Industries after the audit revealed over $2 million in misappropriated funds. Criminal charges were being considered. He fled to Costa Rica, where he would spend the next several years avoiding extradition. Isabel moved back in with her mother. The European aristocrat lifestyle was officially over. She would have to learn to live on a budget for the first time in her life. And Victoria herself retreated to a townhouse in Connecticut, her society friends suddenly too busy to return her calls. When the whispers spread about what Richard had really thought of her, about the recordings that documented her manipulation and deceit, the invitations dried up overnight. She had spent 20 years building a reputation. It took one will reading to destroy it. The weeks following the will reading were chaos. Victoria hired 3 different law firms to contest the will. All 3 eventually withdrew from the case after reviewing Harold's documentation. The video depositions Richard had recorded were devastating. In them, he calmly detailed every manipulation, every lie, every cruelty he had witnessed over 2 decades. He talked about how Victoria had intercepted letters Maya had sent home from college. He talked about how she had edited his emails to Maya, removing expressions of affection and adding criticisms he had never written. He talked about the time she had told him Maya didn't want him at her graduate school graduation, when in fact, Victoria had never even told Maya about the invitation Richard had sent. Year after year, Victoria had worked to sever the bond between father and daughter, and year after year, she had succeeded. Until the end. In his final months, Richard had worked with Harold to reconstruct the truth. They had recovered deleted emails. They had interviewed former household staff who had witnessed Victoria's treatment of Maya. They had built a case so airtight that no lawyer in the country would touch it. Victoria tried to go to the media. She gave interviews portraying herself as a grieving widow being victimized by a vindictive stepdaughter. But the media had access to the same public records that Harold had filed with the probate court. The sympathy she expected never materialized. Within 3 months, she had exhausted her options. She accepted the $1 inheritance and retreated from public life. Preston's downfall was even more spectacular. The audit Maya ordered revealed not just mismanagement, but outright fraud. Preston had been awarding contracts to companies owned by his friends, receiving kickbacks in return. He had been falsifying expense reports for years. He had even been stealing from the company pension fund. The board pressed charges. The district attorney was happy to oblige. Preston fled the country 2 days before he was scheduled to be arrested. He was last seen in Costa Rica, living in a modest apartment and working at a bar that catered to tourists. The life of luxury he had always taken for granted was over. Isabel fared slightly better, if only because her crimes were more social than legal. With her inheritance reduced to $1, she could no longer afford the lifestyle she had cultivated. The designer clothes were sold. The jewelry was pawned. The invitations to exclusive events stopped coming when people realized she could no longer reciprocate. She moved back in with Victoria. 2 women who had once ruled Boston society now sharing a small townhouse and nursing their grievances together. Maya heard about all of this secondhand. She had no interest in tracking their downfall. She had more important things to do. But Maya didn't care about any of that. She was standing in a storage facility in Providence, surrounded by boxes she had never seen before. "These are the items Mr. Calloway kept in storage," Harold had told her. "Personal effects belonging to your mother. He saved everything." Maya opened the first box. Inside were photographs, dozens, of them, her mother holding her as a baby, her parents on their wedding day, family vacations she barely remembered, birthday parties with homemade cakes and too many candles. She opened another box, her mother's nursing textbooks, her mother's jewelry, a pressed flower from the bouquet her father had given her on their first anniversary. Box after box. A lifetime of memories that Maya had been told were thrown away, destroyed, erased. Her father had saved them all. He had hidden them from Victoria, kept them safe, preserved every trace of the woman he had loved and the family they had been before everything went wrong. Maya sat down on the concrete floor, surrounded by her mother's things, and sobbed. Not from grief anymore. Not from anger. from something she hadn't felt in a very long time. Connection. Her parents were gone, but they were also here, in these boxers, in these memories, in the love that had created her. She wasn't alone after all. Maya spent 3 days in that storage facility. She didn't sleep much. She couldn't. Every box she opened revealed another piece of a past she had thought was lost forever. There was her mother's wedding dress, preserved in acid-free tissue paper, as beautiful as the day Elena had worn it. There was the guest book from the wedding, filled with messages from people who had loved Richard and Elena, who had believed in their happiness. There were letters. Hundreds of them. Letters Elena had written to Richard during their courtship. Letters Richard had written to Elena that were never sent. Drafts and revisions of his attempts to express feelings he struggled to put into words. Letters Elena had written to baby Maya, telling her daughter about her hopes and dreams and fears. My darling girl, one letter read, you are 3 months old today, and you are the most perfect thing I have ever seen. Your father is terrified of holding you. He thinks you're so fragile, you might break. But I know better. You are strong, my Maya. You are strong like the ocean you were named for. And whatever comes in your life, that strength will carry you through. Maya read that letter 5 times, tears streaming down her face. There were photograph albums documenting every stage of Maya's early life. Her first steps, her first birthday, her first day of school. Elena had been meticulous, writing captions beneath each photo, preserving every memory. And then the photographs stopped. The last one was dated 3 weeks before Elena's diagnosis. Maya and Elena in the backyard, blowing bubbles, both of them laughing. After that, nothing. But Richard had continued where Elena left off, in a separate box. Maya found another set of albums. These were less carefully curated, the work of a grieving man who didn't know how to document a life, but felt compelled to try anyway. There were Maya's school photos, year after year. Report cards with handwritten notes from teachers praising her intelligence and kindness. Programs from school plays where Maya had small parts. Newspaper clippings about her academic achievements. He had kept everything. Even after Victoria came, even after the distance grew, even after Maya stopped coming home, Richard Calloway had never stopped paying attention to his daughter. He had just lost the ability to show it. Until now. At the bottom of the final box, Maya found a letter addressed to her in her father's handwriting. My dear Maya, it read, if you have found these boxes, then Harold has done his job, and you have received your inheritance. I hope the money brings you security, though I know you have never cared about material things. But these boxers, this is your real inheritance. This is your mother. This is our family. This is the life we had before everything went wrong. I was a coward, Maya. I let Victoria separate us because it was easier than fighting her. I told myself I was protecting you by keeping the peace. In truth, I was protecting myself from the pain of confrontation. Your mother would have been ashamed of me. She was never afraid of anything. You are so like her. Braver than I ever was. Stronger than I ever was. Better than I ever was. I love you. I always loved you. I'm sorry I didn't say it enough. Take care of these things. Take care of yourself, and know that whatever I am, whatever your mother is, we are proud of you. All my love, forever. Dad? Maya held the letter against her chest and wept, not from sadness. Not entirely. From the overwhelming realization that she had been loved all along. She just hadn't been able to see it. 5 years later, the Calloway Foundation headquarters occupied a renovated warehouse on the Boston waterfront. Solar panels on the roof. Green spaces on every floor. A living example of the environmental principles it promoted. Maya walked through the building, greeting employees by name. Marine biologis, environmental engineers, policy advocates, educators. Over 200 people, all working toward the same goal. Protecting the ocean. One project at a time. The foundation had been Maya's first act as heir to the Calloway fortune, but it hadn't been easy. When she first announced her plans, the business press was skeptical. Another billionaire vanity project. Te Cayede. Italiano. Another wealthy person playing at philanthropy, while their accountants figured out the tax benefits. Maya didn't care what they thought. She got to work. She recruited the best marine scientists in the world, offering them salaries competitive with the private sector and the freedom to pursue research that mattered. She hired environmental lawyers who had spent decades fighting corporate polluters and gave them unlimited resources. She built partnerships with indigenous communities whose traditional knowledge of the ocean had been ignored by Western science. In the first year, the Foundation established 3 marine protected areas in the Pacific, working with local governments and fishing communities to create sustainable management plans. They funded research expeditions to unexplored deep-sea ecosystems. They launched an education program that reached over 100,000 students. In the second year, they expanded to the Atlantic. They fought a legal battle against a major oil company that had been illegally dumping waste, winning a settlement that funded coastal restoration projects for a decade. They published research that changed international policy on plastic pollution. By the third year, the Foundation had become one of the most respected environmental organizations in the world. Not because of the money behind it, though the money helped, but because of the results. Maya had taken her father's industrial fortune and transformed it into a force for healing the planet. She liked to think her mother would have approved. The Callaway Industries side of her inheritance had been more complicated. Maya had no interest in running a manufacturing company, but she also couldn't simply walk away from the thousands of employees who depended on those jobs. So, she did something radical. She restructured the company as an employee-owned cooperative. The workers who had spent decades building Callaway Industries were given shares in the company. Management was democratized. Profits were shared. The business press called her insane. They predicted immediate bankruptcy. Instead, productivity increased. Innovation flourished. Employees who had never been asked for their ideas suddenly had a stake in the company's success and responded accordingly. Within 3 years, Callaway Industries was more profitable than it had ever been under Richard's leadership. And Maya, who had never wanted to be a businesswoman, had accidentally become a pioneer in ethical capitalism. She gave interviews about the transition, hoping other companies might follow the model. Some did, most didn't. But the seed had been planted. Change was possible. It just required someone brave enough to try. Maya's office was on the top floor, but she rarely used it. She preferred to work alongside her team, in the open spaces where ideas could flow freely. Today, though, she had a private appointment. A young woman was waiting outside her door, maybe 25, with nervous eyes and a folder clutched to her chest. "Ms. Reyes," the woman said. "I'm so sorry to bother you." "My name is Jessica. I'm one of the summer interns." Maya smiled. "I know who you are. You wrote the policy brief on microplastics that the board reviewed last week. It was excellent." Jessica's face lit up. "Thank you. That means, coming from you, that's everything." Maya gestured to a nearby seating area. "What can I do for you, Jessica?" They sat down. Jessica fidgeted with her folder. "I wanted to ask you something," she said. "About your story. About how you got here." Maya waited. "I read about what happened to you," Jessica continued. "Your family, the will, everything. And I was just wondering, how did you do it? How did you not become bitter?" Maya considered the question. She thought about Victoria, now living in a modest apartment, her former friends having long since abandoned her. She thought about Preston, still hiding in Costa Rica, his grand plans for the family company reduced to nothing. She thought about Isabel, working a regular job for the first time in her life, complaining about it to anyone who would listen. She thought about how easy it would have been to become just like them. "The money didn't fix anything," Maya said finally. "It didn't bring my father back. It didn't erase the years I spent feeling invisible. It didn't heal the wounds." "Then what did?" Jessica asked. "Purpose?" Maya replied. "I realized that I could use what I inherited to become the person I always wanted to be. Not to prove anything to the family who rejected me, but to honor the parents who loved me." She looked out the window at the harbor. "My mother was a nurse. She spent her whole life helping people. My father, despite everything, believed in building things that mattered. I wanted to combine those legacies, to build something that helped people and the planet at the same time." She turned back to Jessica. "The family who tried to erase me, they're irrelevant now. I don't think about them. I don't wish them well or wish them ill. They simply don't take up space in my mind anymore. She smiled. That's how you avoid becoming bitter. You fill your life with things that matter, and you don't leave room for the things that don't. Jessica nodded slowly, absorbing the advice. Thank you, she said. That helps more than you know. Maya reached out and squeezed her hand. You're going to do amazing things, Jessica. I can tell. Trust the process. After the intern left, Maya sat alone for a moment. She thought about her father, about the letter he had written, about the boxers of memories he had preserved. She thought about her mother, about the stories she had been told as a child, about the woman she had tried to become. She thought about the journey from that grocery store in Portland to this office overlooking the harbor. The grief, the anger, the healing. It had taken 5 years, but Maya was finally at peace. Not because she had won. Victory over people who had wronged her had never been the point. She was at peace because she had found her purpose, and that was worth more than any inheritance. Later that evening, Maya drove to a cemetery on the outskirts of the city. She brought 2 bouquets of flowers, one for each of her parents. Richard had been buried next to Elena, just as he had requested in his will. After 20 years of separation, they were finally together again. Maya placed the flowers on both graves. She sat down on the grass between them. Hi, Mom. Hi, Dad. The evening was quiet. Birds sang in the trees. A gentle breeze rustled the leaves. I met with an intern today, Maya continued. She reminded me of myself at that age. Hungry to make a difference. Not sure if she had what it takes. She smiled. I told her she did, because someone told me that once. A professor, years ago. She believed in me before I believed in myself. Maya looked at her father's headstone. I wish you had told me about Victoria sooner. I wish you had fought harder to stay connected, but I also understand why you didn't. You were drowning, and you didn't know how to ask for help. She traced the letters of his name with her finger. I forgive you, Dad. I forgave you a long time ago. I hope, wherever you are, you've forgiven yourself too. She turned to her mother's headstone. I never really knew you, Mom. You died when I was too young to remember more than fragments, but I know you loved me. I know you wanted the best for me. Tears filled her eyes. I hope I'm making you proud. I'm trying to live a life that would make you proud. That's all I can do. She sat there until the sun set, talking to her parents about nothing and everything. The foundation, the ocean, the life she had built from the ruins of the one she had lost. When she finally stood to leave, she felt lighter than she had in years. She looked at both gravestones one last time. I love you both, she said. Thank you for everything you gave me. I'll try to deserve it. She walked back to her car, leaving the cemetery behind. The past was the past, but the future was hers. Epilogue. 10 years later, Maya received a letter on a Tuesday morning. The handwriting on the envelope was shaky, uncertain. The return address was a nursing home in Connecticut. She almost threw it away without opening it. She knew who it was from, but something made her pause. Something made her slide her finger under the seal. Maya, the letter read, I don't expect you to read this. I don't expect you to care, but I am old now, and sick, and I find myself thinking about things I should have thought about long ago. I was cruel to you. I knew it then, and I know it now. I told myself it was because you were a threat, because you stood between my children and the life I wanted for them. But the truth is simpler and uglier than that. I was jealous. Your father never loved me the way he loved your mother. I saw it every time he looked at you. You were the living reminder of the love he lost, and I hated you for it. That was wrong. You were a child. You had done nothing to deserve my treatment. I am not asking for forgiveness. I don't deserve it, and I wouldn't believe it if you offered. I am simply telling you the truth, because I will be dead soon, and I find I cannot face that without acknowledging what I did. Your father was right to leave everything to you. I see that now. Preston and Isabel, they are my fault. I raised them to be entitled and selfish, because I was entitled and selfish. You were raised by Elena, at least for a few years, and that made all the difference. I hope you're happy. I hear that you are doing good things with the money. Your father would be proud. Victoria. Maya read the letter twice. Then she folded it carefully and put it in a drawer. She didn't write back. She didn't visit. She didn't forgive. Exactly. Because forgiveness felt like too simple a word for something so complicated. But she also didn't hate. Victoria was a sad, broken woman who had spent her whole life grasping for things that couldn't make her happy. Hating her would be like hating a storm. Pointless. Exhausting. A waste of the peace Maya had worked so hard to build. Instead, Maya went back to work. There were oceans to protect, students to inspire, a legacy to build. Her mother's legacy. Her father's legacy. And now, her own. Maya Reyes Calloway, as she now called herself. Taking both parents' names at last had found what she had been searching for her whole life. Not money. Not revenge. Not even vindication. Family. Not the family that had rejected her. Not the family she was born into by accident. But the family she had chosen, the colleagues who had become friends. The mentors who had become guides. The students who had become protégés. The community she had built around shared purpose and shared values. That was a real inheritance, and it was worth more than any fortune. And that's the story of a woman who was deliberately excluded from her own father's funeral, only to discover that he had spent his final year making sure she would inherit everything. Here's what I want you to take from this. Family isn't always the people who share your blood. Sometimes, the people who are supposed to love you the most are the ones who hurt you the deepest. Victoria, Preston, and Isabel thought they had won. They thought they had successfully erased Maya from the family. They thought the fortune was theirs. But Richard Calloway saw through them. In the end, when it mattered most, he chose his real daughter over the family who had manipulated him for decades. And Maya? She didn't use the inheritance for revenge. She didn't buy yachts or mansions or anything to prove she had made it. She used it to build something meaningful, something that would outlast her, just like her parents' love had outlasted them. That's the real victory. Not getting the money, not humiliating the villains, but becoming the person you were always meant to be. Now, I want to hear from you. What would you have done if you found out your family had hidden your father's death from you? Would you have walked away, or would you have fought for your inheritance? Let me know in the comments. I read every single one. If this story touched your heart, subscribe. Thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next video.